Hello and welcome to the Sound on Sound People and Music Industry podcast with me, Sam Inglis. I'm very pleased today to be joined by René Mørch from DPA Microphones. Welcome, René.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thanks.
Now, DPA microphones can be found pretty much everywhere on this planet. But in this podcast, we'll be finding out about a DPA mic that is quite literally on another planet. A DPA 4006 mic has been used to capture sounds on the surface of Mars for the first time as a part of NASA's Mars 2020 mission. But before we get into that, this isn't actually the first time that DPA have worked with NASA. In fact, you have quite a long-standing relationship. What's the story there?
Yeah, well, it's the first time that we are on board the mission, so to say. Previous, we have been used on the Apollo 13 mission, the one with Houston, we got a problem. I don't think it was our fault. And also on one of the space shuttles, one of the tours with the Discovery. And in each case, we were standing on ground, so to say, near the launch pad and a little bit away from the launch pad, and recording and broadcasting the sound from the liftoff of these rockets. I think it was back in the 70s, of course, with the Apollo, and later on in the 80s, or perhaps it was even in the 90s with the Discovery liftoff. And again, that's quite a harsh environment because those sound pressure levels are almost out of this world. But still, we were able to record that.
Yes, the technical demands on a microphone that's being used to capture a rocket launch must be pretty spectacular, I imagine.
That's right. Not something that every kind of equipment can really handle.
Absolutely. So what sort of sound pressure level does it reach?
The closest, I think, was about 170 or something like that. And of course, the further you get away, the lower it becomes. So 150 or something, a little bit away from it, which you could say that you can also reach with the voice or on the snare drum or something like that. But 170, that's out of this world.
That is extreme. So how did your involvement in the Mars 2020 mission come about?
Yeah, it was actually JPL and NASA that reached out to us, indicating that they wanted some kind of standard equipment they could hook up on the rover, on the vehicle itself, so they could record what is known as the EDL stage, meaning the entry, descent, and landing. So they had a demand to be able to capture both the audio and video of this particular 7 minutes of terror, as they call it, from you enter the atmosphere of Mars and until you are on the surface of Mars. So those minutes are where a lot of things must go right if the mission is to be a success. And they really wanted to capture that, and also to be able to not to broadcast live, because that's not possible, but at least record and later on share with the public what is going on through that those 7 minutes of terror.
So presumably you had to develop a special microphone for this.
You could think that, and that is a natural thing to think. But actually, it was off-the-shelf components from our side, and that was really also the demand from JPL slash NASA. They didn't want to go for something that was especially made for this kind of tour, and the same counts for the cameras used. And really, that is because if you do that, and you have to make sure that you develop it with this particular purpose in mind, it becomes extremely costly.
Wow! So it was literally an off-the-shelf 4006 microphone, such as you could walk into the warehouse and pick off one of the shelves.
That's right. It is so that we did a few modifications. So it's three different things that we have on board. We have a capsule. We have a small preamplifier that has some electronics in it, and then we have a sort of a POC-sized A to D converter that is placed inside the rover itself. But most of the stuff that we do has a round shape, and that makes it a bit difficult to bolt to the side of a rover. So what we did was we made a pair of Mickey Mouse ears for the preamplifier, so it could actually be bolted to the side of the rover itself. So that was the mechanical thing that was done. And also it was, of course, stripped for whatever nicing up that you normally do on a microphone, because weight is, of course, of a big concern when you have to lift something off from ground to space.
So you know in advance of a mission like this that the equipment is going to encounter extremely harsh and hostile conditions, and obviously you want to be confident that it's going to survive those conditions. How do you test it to make sure that it's going to survive?
Well, obviously we did some initial testing ourselves. I cannot go into details about that, but the main testing was, of course, done by NASA. And what you can imagine, if I should talk into that, is of course that something that is on a long journey, traveling from the surface of Earth through the atmosphere, our atmosphere, into vacuum in space and back to an atmosphere on Mars, and landing like we saw it did, coming down from this extreme high velocity, being sort of dampened in its approach to the surface of Mars. Finally being shot out of this space shuttle, and the last few meters hoisted down from a space crane with rockets on the sides. That is just extreme in terms of vibrations, of course, and all sorts of gases and what have you flying around it, and of course temperatures going from the extreme cold to the extreme heat. At the same time, during the journey, you also go to extreme temperatures. And as I said, going in and out of vacuum and all these sorts of changes is typically something that has a big impact on electronics and mechanics as we are using here.
So prior to the 7 minutes of terror during the landing phase, you've got 7 months of relatively tranquil journey through space. Now, slightly to my surprise, the mic was actually able to capture sounds during this phase of the journey. I wonder if we could hear some of those now. So, can you explain to us what we're hearing there? Because I think the one thing we all know about space is that sound doesn't travel in space, right?
Yeah, as I said, it's vacuum. So there's no molecules to be bumping to each other. So no, it's what we're hearing is structural borne noise. I think you all know it when you have, for example, a directional microphone. That when you touch it, when you touch the cable and so on, you can actually have sound coming through that just by bouncing or just by touching it. This is of course why a lot of microphones have either built in a damping system or you put it into one of the anti-vibration setups that you see in studios and of course on booms and so on and so forth. So this is the kind of the same thing that we're experiencing here. Now it's an omnidirectional microphone that is typically much less prone to this sort of structural borne noise. But still, as I said before, we did make a modification that meant that the unit could be bolted to the side of the rover. So what we are hearing is actually something that is set adrift, so to say, from the vibrations of the rover itself. And what we're actually hearing is a heat pump inside the rover, where it's sort of just like a cooler on a conventional vehicle motor or engine, where you are having fluid that cools down the engine itself. So in this particular situation, it's the energy source of the rover that is cooled down, and thereby pump through a lot of small pipes throughout the rover that keeps it warm, at the same time cools the energy reservoir. So that is basically what is going on. And yes, it was part of starting up equipment on the journey to Mars. So they started up all sorts of different parts of the rover to make sure that it actually survived the travel into space and also during space, that it was still ready to go to capture those 7 minutes of terror.
So after 7 months of waiting, you finally have the key 7 minutes of terror. That must have been pretty intense experience for you personally.
Yeah. I was sitting with my family at home. It was in the night here in Europe, as you know, and we watched what happened on at the control center at JPL. And we didn't get any pictures, we didn't get any audio, we didn't get anything because all we could see was the guys, and there was only a few guys. It was through the pandemic, so most of the guys were back at home doing the remote, logging in and controlling and monitoring stuff from there. But those few that was gathered in the control room in Pasadena we saw that, and where they raised their hands and shouts. That's really yes. Whew, it all went well, and then we waited at DPA. We waited for the files to be downloaded, so that took quite some hours because again, it wasn't the main purpose for this mission, obviously. But we had promised to clean up the files for JPL NASA, and we got those after some hours. I think it was during the week. It was during the weekend. But we were warned prior to getting it that they have had a software error. So unfortunately, when we received the file, it had absolutely no audio. So that was a bit of a bummer. Fortunately, they were able to during the weekend. They were able to power up our part of the mission, and they actually captured sound from the surface of Mars. So for the first time, we heard through a microphone what it would be like standing on the surface of Mars.
Incredible. So I think we're going to be able to hear a little bit of that sound now. Amazing. That's sound from the surface of another planet for the first time. Now, I wonder if you could explain to us a little bit about what we're hearing in that clip.
Yeah, that's for us. It was really like we were having goosebumps, of course, everywhere because it was just wow. It's the first time we hear something from Mars, and what we're actually hearing is the weather. So we hear a wind gust from passing the rover. At this point, the rover is standing still. It doesn't move. Because we are now, we have just entered and just making sure that everything is working at this point. So they are starting up all sorts of scientific equipment, making sure that everything has survived. And actually driving is way down the line, and not something that was supposed to happen until I think it was weeks later than the entry was happening. And that one funny part of this is that our part was not supposed to work at this point. So NASA hoped that it would work after the vehicle was standing on the surface of Mars, but they didn't expect it because having seen those pictures of the rover going down, having seen those last seconds where it actually hoisted down from the sky crane, you think, well, nothing can survive that. But as you could hear, it actually did.
So the microphone had exceeded its design goals simply by operating at all on the surface of Mars.
Yeah.
And most of the instruments that the rover carried obviously had a clearly defined scientific purpose. What was NASA's goal in incorporating a microphone into it?
Obviously, it was primarily, as I said in the beginning, was really a goal to capture that EDL stage and to convey that to a broad audience, not just scientific people, not just for themselves, not just for the engineers, but really for each and every one, showing what it's like being and hearing what it's like being through this stage. So it didn't have you could say a scientific success goal, but obviously the engineers said from the start it would be fantastic if it was also working afterwards, because then it could also be used for finding things that goes wrong, so to say, just like listening to your own car. If something starts to say clunk, 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 or whatever, you would probably pull over and have a look at what there was, and even take it to the garage if it continues. So you could get an early warning of things that might start to go wrong, or even if something has gone wrong, you could start to get an idea of what part it is. Again, you can't send the mechanics to Mars yet, so you have to do everything from remote and by the means that you have. So so basically they hoped big times for this one to being able to continue to work up there.
So not only did the microphone survive the landing and operate once the rover was landed, it also survived long enough to capture some of the sounds of the rover driving around. So let's hear a little bit of that now. And that's pretty incredible. That is a recording of powered transport on another planet. That's the Perseverance rover trundling around the surface of Mars. Can you explain what we're hearing?
Yeah, it's not really. It doesn't sound that good, does it? As the one of the project leads, Dave Brüel, states when they published this, if this was my car, I would definitely pull over and ask for it to be pulled away, because obviously this doesn't sound good. But what we are hearing is, of course, the gears inside the motors on the rover, the 6 wheels rolling over the surface of Mars. And remember, those wheels are there's no air, there's no rubber, there's nothing between those alloy wheels, so it's really metal to rock. So there's nothing to dampen that part of it. And again, we have both the acoustical part of it. We also have the structural part of the unit driving around up there. So that is really what we're hearing. But yes, it's amazing hearing something that far away driving over the surface. That's I can't say it's just, when we heard that, I was yes, fantastic.
Of course, the atmosphere of Mars is very different from that of Earth. It's much, much thinner and has a rather different composition of gases. Yes. How does that affect the behavior of a standard microphone?
It doesn't affect the microphone itself. What it affects is, of course, the sounds coming out of being there. What you have is a much thinner atmosphere. As you said, it's I can't remember the units. It's like 100 parts lower than the atmosphere on Earth. But also, as you said, the gas mix is very different. What it all boils down to is that you get a pitch change, so that you have less of the high frequencies and more of the lower frequencies up there that you'll hear. At the same time, you'll also notice, if you were there, that sound doesn't travel that far. Yeah, again, because of the different composition and pressure and so on. So things that you will be able to hear from a distance on Earth, you'll not be able to hear from very far away on the surface of Mars.
And do you process the audio files in any way to try to adapt their frequency response to make it more like what we're used to?
No, and I think that's a bit of what DPA is all about, trying to convey exactly what is going on without doing anything to it. What we did on this particular, some of these particular recordings was we made one that is with everything, and then we made another one where we took out some of those, as we said, heat pumps and all sorts of noisy stuff, so you can actually hear those sounds coming to it, the acoustical born sounds coming to it, and suppressing, so to say, the structural born side of it. But you'll be able, on NASA's homepage, you'll be able to find both processed and non-processed. But from a start and from a technical point of view, we are recording exactly what hits the microphone.
Extraordinary. And I think one lesson we can all learn from this is a lot of us studio engineers are conditioned to think that capacitor mics are inherently fragile and that they have to be treated with kid gloves. But this obviously is an example of a situation where a capacitor mic has been subjected to unbelievably harsh treatment, and yet it's still performed above expectations. So I'm guessing this has benefits for us down on Earth as well.
Yeah, but again, this is all down to, again, boils down to what DPA is all about, making something that is really robust and withstands much more harsh environments than you would expect. Yeah, we see even our miniature mics being used on sports cars, racing cars. We see it on helicopters, motorcycles, tanks, all sort of stuff where it's really abused and still works fantastic. On some of these very fast cars that races every Sunday, they are even in the engine compartment. So it's again gets extremely loud, gets extremely heated up, and still it survives week after week. Yeah, you can even say that on a vocal mic, we have those two mics, the de facto and the 2028. A few years back, I would like to highlight that one. A few years back, Celine Dion was visiting Copenhagen, and during her performance for 16,000 people in the Royal Arena, she drops her de facto microphone, and of course she's wearing her in-ears, and she is really scared that it's defect at this point. And of course she's talking into it, saying, "Well, does this one still work?" And she gets a thumb up in her in-ears, and she says, "Oh, that's amazing! Not a dent, no nothing, and it still works. It's fantastic." And then she's also being told in her in-ears that it's actually made in Denmark. "It's made here in Copenhagen," she says. I say, "Okay, well, thanks." But that is, that is also a typical DPA characteristic that we make things to last.
Well, in this case, it seems the 4006 has passed the ultimate test of durability because it's survived 7 months in space, 7 minutes of terror, and quite a few weeks on the surface of Mars as well. An extraordinary story. Well, thank you so much, René. I really appreciate you joining us today. It's been great to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you.
Thanks very much. You've been listening to the Sound on Sound People and Music Industry podcast with me, Sam Inglis, and René Mørch of DPA Microphones. Be sure to check out the show notes page for this episode where you'll find photos and more. And in the meantime, thank you very much for listening.